In today's video, we are going to dive into everything you need to know about Candyman, a 2021 supernatural slasher film. The film follows a young man and his partner who move into a loft in the now gentrified Cabrini many years after the last of the Cabrini towers were demolished. A chance meeting with an old-timer reveals the true story behind Candyman to the couple. In his eagerness to use these macabre details in his studio as new grist for paintings, he unwittingly opens a door to a complex past that unravels his own sanity and unleashes a terrifying wave of violence. Now, this movie will have you on the edge of your seat, so we must warn you, there will be major spoilers ahead. The film begins by following a young boy in the Cabrini-Green projects who is told by his mother to do laundry. As he is heading there, he passes some police officers. Finally, when the boy is alone in the room, he hears a man humming and then sees the man emerge from a hole in the wall with a hook for a hand. The police rush inside after hearing the boy's gut-wrenching scream. Fast forward to the present day, the film follows Anthony McCoy, who is a Chicago-based visual artist who also lives with his girlfriend, Brianna Cartwright, who also happened to be an art gallery director. One day, Brianna's brother Troy tells her about Helen Lyle, a white graduate student who ended up going on a murderous rampage back in the early 1990s. Her killing spree, according to the legend, culminated in a bonfire outside the Cabrini-Green projects where she attempted to sacrifice an infant child. Residents were able to save the child from Helen before she died in the fire in what appeared to be an act of self-immolation. Very intrigued, Anthony latches onto this story and wanders around Cabrini-Green looking for inspiration, desperate for some kind of creative spark that could help turn his career around. The next day, Anthony runs into William Burke, who tells him that Cabrini-Green didn't really have a large police presence until more white people started moving there. Burke then tells Anthony about the neighborhood legend of Candyman, a terrifying figure. Burke was introduced to Candyman as a child. He was the boy in the opening scene because he knew a man named Sherman Fields, a local with a hook hand who gave candy to children. Sherman was the prime suspect when a young white girl discovered a razor blade in her Halloween candy. Burke inadvertently allowed the police to find Sherman after he screamed, and the cops brutally beat Sherman to death until he was unrecognizable. When more razor blades were discovered in candy later on, it was too late for people to realize Sherman was actually innocent. According to the legend, if a person looks in the mirror and says Candyman's name 5 times, he will appear and claim his next victim. Once Burke had told the full story of the terrifying legend, Anthony walks outside and subsequently gets stung by a bee. Meanwhile, after learning about the Candyman's true origins, Anthony has a show at the gallery where Brianna works. The exhibit is a mirror in which visitors are challenged to stare at their reflections and say Candyman's name 5 times. During the exhibition, Anthony meets critic Finley Stevens, who criticizes him and other artists for taking a stand on social issues. Anthony becomes enraged when an attendee asks him a patronizing question before snapping at Brianna's co-workers, Clive Privler and Jerica Cooper, with the two of them claiming that Anthony only got to do this exhibition because of his girlfriend Brianna, but Anthony manages to get a diss in at Clive before ultimately leaving. Soon after, when they are back at home, Brianna tries to console Anthony. Meanwhile, after the gallery closes, Clive and Jerica try to hook up. Then they stand in front of the mirror, and Jerica says Candyman 5 times in a row. Candyman then terrifyingly appears in the reflection after a few seconds and slashes Jerica's throat. Clive notices Candyman in the shadows approaching him, but despite his attempts to flee, Clive is slashed to death and his corpse is laid next to Jerica. The next morning, Brianna discovers Clive and Jerica's bodies. This instantly brings back horrible memories of when she was a child and saw her dad commit suicide. When the news soon gets out that their bodies were discovered in front of Anthony's controversial display, he has a dazed look in his eyes before simply saying, "I'm glad I got mentioned," which both Brianna and Troy find disgusting. He later goes to Finley's house for an interview, the critic from the gallery, where he discusses his feelings about gentrification in the area and in general. He also challenges Finley to say Candyman's name. Soon after, however, Anthony is drawn outside the apartment while Finley uses the bathroom. Anthony then notices his reflection and appears to see Candyman, his hook right where Anthony's hand is. After Anthony leaves, visibly confused by what is going on, we see Candyman's invisible spirit attack Finley in the bathroom, slashing her throat and dragging her face across the window. Anthony begins to become obsessed and conducts additional research on Candyman and Helen Lyle. At the library, he listens to recordings left by Helen, detailing what she saw and learned while at Cabrini-Green. Anthony then notices a piece of candy fall to the floor while in the elevator. As he picks it up, he cuts his finger on it because he notices it contains a razor blade, a very similar feature to what the Candyman was known for. Clearly suspicious about what is going on, just before he decides to flee, he is again frightened by the image of Candyman. In a panic, Anthony returns to Burke, where he discusses how he sees Candyman's victims and reflects them in his art. Burke explains that Candyman represents many victims of racial injustice, but the first examples date back to the late 1800s, when a black man named Daniel Robitaille worked as an artist for a white family and fell in love with the eldest daughter. The story goes that Daniel and the eldest daughter ended up falling pregnant and are already already enraged father subsequently discovered her pregnancy and led a mob after Robitaille, torturing him, severing his hand, covering him in honey to attract bees, and finally setting him on fire. Meanwhile, Brianna notices Anthony's paintings and expresses concern for his mental health. Anthony smashes the mirrors when she tries to say Candyman's name, driving her away to stay with Troy and Grady. A group of teenage girls are then seen gathering in a bathroom at a prep school to say Candyman's name after one of them saw Anthony's display at the gallery. One of them runs away before it's finished, and another girl sits in a stall while this is going on. The girls try to leave the bathroom after nothing happens, but the door is locked. One of the girls then returns to the mirror, and the others can only hear Candyman's hook digging into her flesh. The girl in the stall can only see her classmates being slaughtered through a reflection in a small mirror. In the meantime, Anthony pays a visit to his mother, Anne-Marie, as his body and mind quickly deteriorate. He begins to mention Candyman and what he discovered about Cabrini-Green. He realizes he is the baby who was abducted decades ago, but Anne-Marie explains that while Helen did kidnap him, she was actually saving him from Candyman, who had apparently chosen Anthony specifically for a very dark purpose. Following the news, Anthony departs, believing that his mother lied to him and withheld important information from him. Burke captures both Anthony and Brianna just as they appear to be ready to reconcile. He takes them to an abandoned church where he calls the cops and pretends to be in distress. Burke sees Candyman as a symbol of resistance to racial oppression, and he knows Anthony, whose body is half decayed, is destined to join the ranks of Daniel Robitaille and Sherman Fields as the new Candyman. As a result, Burke saws off Anthony's right hand and hooks it there. Luckily, Brianna manages to escape just as the cops arrive. Despite Burke's pursuit, Brianna stabs him to death with a pen. Anthony then collapses into her arms, weakened. The cops then storm in and shoot him dead. The film comes to a close as Brianna is arrested by some corrupt cops. The lead officer attempts to persuade her to spin the story in order to either make Anthony the sole perpetrator of the murders or to make her look like an accomplice. Brianna, knowing what the cops are up to, asks to look in the mirror in exchange for saying whatever the cops want. Candyman is summoned, and an officer emerges from the building with his throat slashed. Anthony is now the Candyman spirit, and he murders the other officers. The lead cop, however, is able to flee, with Anthony quickly following. Meanwhile, Brianna gets out of the car and witnesses Anthony murdering the cop. Anthony is consumed by a swarm of bees, and he assumes the form of Robitaille. As more cops arrive, Robitaille has only one request for Brianna: tell everyone. As you can see, the newer version of the classic horror film Candyman is a much different take. While still following the same basic premise regarding summoning the Candyman, it focuses a lot heavier on race and discrimination in the Candyman's origin story. But we want to know, what would you do if you were in Anthony's position? Would you tell those around you that you were turning into this murderous monster who kept it hidden? Let us know what you think in the comment below. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you next time.